this April 28, 2021 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And thank you so much for joining us. So we do have an updated agenda to reflect the meeting on Monday night when council wanted to return for a slight revision in the language on the ordinance on parking. And so we'll do that, and then we'll flow into the original work session order as planned. So I will turn that over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we are probably going directly to Christy and Matt, I think, for this next discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we're returning today to answer questions that you may have about the ordinance discussion on Monday night that had to do with the establishment of 60 spots per location for car camping and 40 tents per site for tent camping. Tent camping. And there were many questions that came up on Monday evening, and you asked to continue this conversation at that time. And so with that, Mayor, Matt and I are here to answer questions and provide as much information as needed.
Thank you. Let's see, I guess I have to. So I don't know whether Councilor Keating, do you want to speak to this? You had put some edits forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think I'm happy to speak to it now if you'd like, but I was waiting to hear a motion on the table, and then I was going to make 3 amendments based on the conversation we had late Monday night.
Okay, with that preamble, Jennifer, you want to put a motion on the table?
Yeah, I don't have one, so I guess I'm just going to wing this. So you can let me know, Catherine, if I mess it up. But I move to approve an ordinance. Do we have a number?
Yeah. How about we cut and paste this into the chat? Or
yeah, good.
I don't want to get it wrong, so.
Yeah, give us a second.
Or I have it in front of me. I could make the motion and Jennifer could second.
That works too.
Is that all right, Mayor?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Oh, I thought I had it.
I have the thing from last night. Do you just want me to read that, Catherine? Will that work? Okay, so I move to approve an ordinance allowing for the temporary establishment of safe parking and safe tent sites that are larger than allowed under section 4.816 of the Eugene Code 1971. Declaring an emergency, providing an immediate effective date, and providing a sunset date.
Second.
Okay, now, Matt, you may speak to it.
Thank you, Mayor. Move to amend the second sentence of paragraph B of the ordinance findings to remove the words illicit camping and replace the words those camping with unhoused residents. So the sentence reads, this often results in unsanitary and unsafe conditions for unhoused residents and for the surrounding community, particularly the nearby businesses and residents. And to amend the first sentence of section 5 to replace the words illicit camping with the words significant increase in vehicular living and unsanctioned erection of tent camps. So the sentence reads, due to the immediate need to address the significant increase in vehicular living and unsanctioned erection of tent camps occurring throughout the community by establishing lawful sites to park vehicles or erect tents, an emergency is declared to exist that cannot be addressed by the ordinance adoption procedures in section 28, subsection 1 of the Eugene Charter of 2002.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of the ordinance as amended? No, all in favor of? Catherine, go ahead.
So you're going to vote on this first amendment first.
Right. Oh, right. Right. Yes. Yes.
If Matt could speak to purpose of this amendment.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilor. And for those for colleagues, I sent this via email so you could track along and see the edits as well. But not every person who's living in their vehicle is participating in illegal or illicit activity. And so to paint with a broad brushstroke, folks who are so destitute, who are a most vulnerable population, as all who are participating in illicit camping, does a disservice. And our role here, or my hope, is that we're passing ordinance that helps lift folks out of poverty by establishing safe sites to camp, or safe sites to park, or safe sites to erect a tent. Hence why removing the words illicit camping is an important point. And I hope council will stand unanimously in supporting this amendment. There are two more, and I did reference those Monday night. Those are also sent in your email, but I hope that addresses your inquiry, Councilor.
Yeah, just for new councilors, usually we speak to why we want to do it, and then we make the motion as to what we want to do. That's usually helpful in the deliberations.
Copy that. In my experience on the LCC board, it's different. The motion's made and then we speak to the motion. But I will happily change my approach.
Okay, so all in favor of this first language change, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And any opposed? No, so that passes. And I see that Emily is still disconnected, but okay, so that passes, thank you. And then on to the next set.
Thank you, Mayor. Move to, to Councilor Zelenka's point, this motion is in regards to providing potable water and renewable power, as suggested Monday evening by Manager Maderi, rather than codifying such a request. Citing it as a goal was illustrated as an important point, so it doesn't prevent us or lock us into to not being able to acquire certain land for these purposes. But water is life, and providing basic needs are critical. Therefore, move to amend the second sentence of the paragraph entitled Safe Tent Sites in Section 1 to add the goal of providing renewable power and potable water. So the sentence reads, quote, in addition to any conditions imposed by the City Council at the time of site approval to address site-specific issues, all safe tent sites authorized and established pursuant to this ordinance shall have adequate garbage and toilets, with a goal of providing renewable power and potable water at all sanctioned sites, end quote.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Alan, I see your hand up. You have a comment?
By power, you meant electricity?
Correct.
Okay. Maybe we should say electricity instead of power, but and that's an important point to make it a goal, I think, because having worked at electric utility, people always underestimate what it actually costs to provide these things. It can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the site, to get electricity to a site. So and depending on what it's being used for. But as a goal, I think it's a really good idea to have water and I think Councilor Ye asked a clarifying question of whether or not hand washing stations were part of the potable water, and that was an affirmative to that.
So what I understand is that, you know, since we've Councilor Zelenka, since we've launched into COVID and protocols there, what we've learned is the hand washing stations are a really valuable resource to support our unhoused in those sites. And so it's not, I don't think it's implicitly in the definition of toilet, but it's our intent to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Good add, Matt.
Thank you, Counselor.
Okay, Claire and then Jennifer.
Thank you. So I definitely support the intent, though I do have a question. Is the request that it be renewable power because you're trying to deal with climate recovery ordinance, or is it to avoid the use of generators because there might be a site that has access to just a regular eWeb hookup, which would not be renewable? So Mayor, if Councilor Keating could respond to that.
Both. Yeah, thank you, Counselor. Both. There's a rest stop in our neighborhood here in South Eugene that's using a generator that isn't exactly adhering to our carbon reduction goals, but nevertheless, emergency power is needed, or emergency access to power is needed. So there further. And I've sent this communication to the Assistant City Manager's office. There are municipalities that are seeing the benefits of using solar power at what we call rest stops or low barrier shelters. And so by underscoring the renewable piece, it's my hope that our service providers and our municipality can find renewable energy sources to simply allow folks to charge a cell phone, especially in the midst of a pandemic, preventing folks from having to gather or congregate.
I'm not questioning the need for asking that power be there. I'm wondering if it needs to be renewable power, or if eWeb connection to an eWeb transmission line would satisfy the goal.
I would hope that a connection to eWeb would satisfy the need, but the goal, I would hope, would be renewable.
Okay, so you do want it to be renewable if possible.
As a goal, but as a matter of necessity, hence why I suspect that there is, or hence why there is merit and a wise approach in establishing this as a goal, so it doesn't lock us in. That's where my head is.
So I would like to make a friendly amendment. First, I think saying the ordinance shall have adequate garbage is not a very graceful turn of phrase, because the idea is to remove the garbage. So I would like to add the word garbage collection to the text, and would prefer to read this ordinance shall, pursuant to this ordinance, shall have adequate garbage collection, toilets, and potable water, and then with the goal of providing renewable power at all sanctioned sites.
I welcome that friendly amendment, Councilor.
And City Manager, or Assistant City Manager, do you think adding that as a requirement will create barriers to us being able to carry this out?
I'll jump in, Sarah, if that's okay. I do not believe that is going to be a barrier. I think that it's very clear what the intent is, and it's in alignment with what we're already doing. So thank you.
Okay. So I understand that Councilor Keating and Councilor Ye accept that as a friendly rewording of the proposed amendment. Thank you.
Great. So I had Jennifer in the queue, but your hand is down, so you're done. Emily.
Thank you. I'm sorry to be late. My computer's actually not working. So I missed it. Did we include hand washing in the toilet, in the porta potty needs?
Councilor, I can speak to that. So what I had said is that the definition of toilet, I don't believe necessarily includes hand washing stations. However, based on our change in some of our protocols and what we're providing, we are providing hand washing stations, and we recognize what a value that is to have those on site. And so our intent is to continue to provide them.
But we don't want to specify them?
That obviously would be up to you guys if you decide you would like to add that.
Well, I would like to add it in there. I think that especially in COVID, that's critical.
Make it friendly.
Yep.
I make a friendly motion to add hand washing facilities, however it should be phrased.
Do you accept that, Matt? And
Yeah, I do, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor, for the observation. I had suspected it would be implied and then ultimately inferred by referencing potable, but I appreciate the specificity, so I welcome it. Yes.
I think that in this situation, it's necessary to be clear.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's welcome.
Okay, so are we ready to vote now on this next editorial change to the text? All in favor, please raise your hands.
I apologize for my late delivery. Could you restate the motion, please?
Yeah, I was just going to make a point of order on that.
Okay, so
Would you like me to read it?
yeah, that would be great.
And before I read it, I just want to make one note, and the only reason I'm noting it is because of the addition of some of the language is that the proposed amendment is only to the safe tent sites paragraph, not to the safe parking. So I just want to make sure that's clear. So move to amend the second sentence of the paragraph titled Safe Tent Sites in Section 1 to add the goal of providing renewable power and potable water to the sentence so that the sentence reads, in addition to any conditions imposed by the City Council at the time of site approval to address site-specific issues, all safe tent sites authorized and established pursuant to this ordinance shall have adequate garbage collection, toilets, and hand washing stations, and a goal of providing renewable power at all sanctioned sites.
Well, Emily, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, please. Why does it not apply to the car camping? And do we want to say toilets if we're bringing porta potties? Because they're not the same.
Toilets is I believe the language. I tried to remain consistent with your rest stop. And as I recall, that was what was used in the rest stop program. So you certainly can change that.
Well, I just see a problem if we put in, and I'm sorry about the rest stop part, but if we say toilets and then we put in porta potties, I think we could be sued for not having plumbing.
No. You certainly can provide clarity. I don't have a concern about being sued.
All right. Well, I missed the part about why this is only for the tents and not the cars.
Councillor Keating.
It was a sheer numbers, you know, and I'm assuming, I probably shouldn't assume that the car camping would be in close proximity to the tent camping, and no, I'm seeing head nods. Look, if it's the will of the council that we provide these services for emergency authorized sanctioned car camping as well, I'm not going to get in the way of that progress. But I felt the need to highlight, to be specific about the tent camping sites in particular. I would be thrilled, Councillor Semple, if you made a motion to the effect that mirrored the language for car camping as well. And I really catch myself every time I say car camping. As I mentioned Monday night, I fundamentally believe that's a bit of a misnomer to attach camping to emergency vehicle living, but that's neither here nor there. I get the intent of what you're addressing.
Well, I think it's critical. I don't think that we can provide toilets for tents and not for cars. There's no toilets in my car. So I don't think why isn't it just to both things right from the get-go? Let's not make any more separation of facilities for anybody.
So if I could just jump in as a point of clarification, it does say in the safe parking sites, adequate garbage and toilets. I think we might want to modify, so you could make those parallel to the safe tent sites, but it does already mention garbage and toilets in.
So did the tent sites before. We're adding these things.
You could,
anyway, I just think it should be fair that everyone should have a toilet and hand washing and energy and water.
I agree. I'm just clarifying that it already has part of it. You can add all the pieces that you added to the tent sites.
Well, I don't know what needs to happen to do that. And I don't know why it needs to be two separate motions to fix this.
It could be, if the maker and the second are amenable to it, it could say, move to amend the second sentence of the paragraphs entitled safe tent sites and safe parking sites to read, and then have it be the same.
That would be most welcome.
Yeah.
That's fine, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Alan and then Randy.
No, I was actually going to make that point and make a friendly amendment to do exactly the same thing. So thanks.
Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to point out, while I think it's great to be able to provide power, providing power to people who are housed in tents or in automobiles is very different than providing power to people who are housed in camp trailers, campers, and RVs. Different needs. If the expectation is providing, a central location where people can receive power, I think that's one thing. If it's being delivered to every site, I think it's going to get in the way of our ability to serve.
Okay, are we ready to vote on this next set of text changes? Emily.
Sorry, but it seems like we might want to make that clear, because I don't want to be running somebody's washing machine in their RV. I'm more interested in powering up phones and wheelchairs and any life-sustaining equipment. So I think that this could be really important, that we're clear about how much electricity we're willing to pay for.
Up to the city manager implementation.
Yeah.
And so the one thing that, as I understand all the friendlies, the one thing that is remaining as the goal would be a goal of providing renewable power. So that provision, just the power in general, is a goal. So it wouldn't, I don't think there's a limitation.
Yeah. So it's open enough that the manager can make a decision about what's realistic in terms of the provision of power and cost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Are you okay with that, Emily and Randy? Okay. Okay. So are we clear on the language, or do we need to read this? Or
That's what I was going to ask, Mayor, if it could be read one final time, please.
So I'm going to do even a little bit more changing just to pull out the entry. So it says, move to amend the second sentence of the paragraphs entitled safe tent sites and safe parking sites in section 1, so that the sentences read, quote, in addition to any conditions imposed by the city council at the time of site approval to address site-specific conditions, all safe tent or safe parking sites authorized and established pursuant to this ordinance shall have adequate garbage collection, toilets, hand washing stations, and potable water, with a goal of providing renewable power at all sanctioned sites. So, sound like it hit all the...
okay. Are you all comfortable with that? Okay. All in favor, please. Oh,
Matt has his.
Matt has his hand raised. Matt, do you want to address this?
I'm sorry, and I don't mean to overcomplicate it, Catherine. I think it's not the second sentence in safe parking sites. I think it's the fourth sentence. Just
say last sentence.
Last sentence in either.
Applicable sentence.
Oops, you're on mute, Catherine. You're on mute.
I'll just change it to say move to amend the paragraphs entitled.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and we'll make it work. Since we're amending, what's going to happen is I'll have to update this ordinance to reflect it. And so I'll get us there. I promise.
Okay, so all in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed? 1. Okay, so that passes 7-1. Thank you. All right, Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. Finally, and to Councillor Zelenka's point, I'll speak to it before making the motion. I hope that this one is supported unanimously because of the history this nation has with relocating populations and the not so recent, or actually the not so distant history, like in the last 100 years, less than 100 years, how problematic relocation of human populations has been. Therefore, I am suggesting replacing the language relocating with transitioning. Move to amend the first and second sentences of section 2 to replace the word relocating with transitioning so that the sentences read, quote, when a safe parking site is authorized and established pursuant to this ordinance, transitioning the vehicles unlawfully parked on city right-of-way in West Eugene shall be prioritized. When a safe tent site is authorized and established pursuant to this ordinance, transitioning the tent campers at 13th and Chambers and in Washington Jefferson Park shall be prioritized. End quote.
Emily, you have a comment?
I don't understand why you want to use transition. To me, transition can take place in many steps. And it feels like I could move your tent a block closer every week before I've actually relocated you. I understand the emotional baggage with the word relocate, but I think transition is very not clear for what we're wanting to do.
Mayor, may I ask for a second before we dive into conversation?
Sure.
Sorry.
Sorry, that was my fault. Do we have a second?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, with respect, relocating strikes me as harsh and relatively nebulous, though the intent may be recognized at this juncture in history. Relocating someone against their will, or relocating someone forcibly, or relocating someone via tow truck, or relocating someone in the back of a law enforcement vehicle strikes me as or smacks of potentially harsh and arguably unacceptable actions. Transitioning someone from point A to point B is more appropriate. And this nation and humans throughout history have a long and checkered past of relocating human populations against their will in a way that is not only uncomfortable, it's immoral. And transitioning alongside our service providers is a far more appropriate step that I hope will be supported and the intent will still be recognized.
How about we just say move?
I would thank you, Councillor. I would put move in that same category as relocate, maybe not as harsh, but the point of all this, I suspect, and I'm just one of 8, but the point I would hope would be to lift folks out of poverty, our most desperate and vulnerable populations who are hanging by a thread. And our service providers do amazing work, yeoman's effort of helping transition folks. Our rest stops have an amazing transition rate. And in conversations with staff, the word transition struck my ear in a way that was more comfortable and more appropriate for this time and point in history. And I give kudos to staff. I don't know if it was their intent to, in exploring this conversation, to alter the verbiage. But when I heard transition, I recognized that this would land far better with our most vulnerable population and our service providers and our community at large if we replace the verb relocate with relocating with transition.
I have a real problem with transition. I just don't think that it fits here. So I right now, I don't think I can support it. Thanks.
Okay, let's see what others have to say. We have Randy, then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand what Councilor Keating is trying to do here, and I'm supportive of the concept, but in practical application, I'm inclined to agree with Councilor Semple. I just feel that transition doesn't seem immediate to me, and I would support movement or move. I think it means the same thing, but maybe the word doesn't have the same connotation. I'd be interested to see if other councilors have a different word they could add in. Thank you.
All right, Alan and then Mike.
Yeah, in the interest of moving forward and compromise, a third word probably is appropriate here. So as the seconder, Matt, would you accept moving instead of transitioning?
I would. I appreciate the call for compromise, but I think move is still in that relocate category, Counselor. So I would be voting against a move or a relocate, and long for keeping a transition language. I get the consternation my colleagues have expressed, but I would not accept that amendment.
I guess to that point, Councilor Keating, this paragraph is explicitly doing is a very specific action, which is when those safe parking and safe tent sites become available, we're going to move the people that are at these locations over to these locations. I totally agree with you that what we're trying to do is transition these people. For instance, that was the whole goal behind the original Opportunity Village. I made that motion. We transition people into more stable environments, and in those cases, we were wildly successful. And if someone had asked me when we first did that, how many people would transition, I would have said 5%. Well, Opportunity Village had 60% of people transition to stability, but we had to move them there first. Then we transitioned them. So I get what folks are saying. I still think might end up with a move as an amendment.
I hear that, and thank you. I'd love to hear from staff. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but it would be helpful if staff weighed in to help.
Yeah, I totally get the relocating. I mean, we've got a monument next to the Holt Center about the forced relocation of Japanese Americans during World War II, which is just an appalling and dark part of American history. And so I totally get the relocating is not the right word. But I don't put the same connotation on move, because that's what we're doing. We're moving people from here to here. That's far cry from the relocation that we did to Japanese Americans in World War II. Thanks.
Okay, I have Mike, then Claire, then Jennifer, and then the manager can weigh in on this.
Alan touched eloquently on a lot of the things I might say here, but I guess I, being one never to be worried about asking staff tough questions here, I would ask them, what's the point of opening up the new camps?
To Councilor Clark, the point of opening the new camps is to build capacity for those that are unsheltered right now, to provide safer places for people to be, to connect them to services, and to also, help provide a path forward to the next transition to different housing.
Anyone in general, or the people who are camped currently inappropriately in the two locations listed?
We're prioritizing those groups because one of the things that we want to do is return the park to available to the full public. And we also want to help offer a solution for those people that are using camping in their cars or RVs in places that are not suitable for that purpose.
I understand Matt's sensitivity to the word and being intelligently and wisely sensitive to that. I agree with the initial statements that those events in our history were awful, but I don't buy the premise that they're the same in this case. I don't agree with that. in the cases listed, those were people in their homes and in places where they were appropriately at home where they belonged. In these cases, these folks are not in appropriate places. They're in public spaces where their infringement on see them as so with the idea need to be read.
Mike, you're breaking up, so we're only getting part of what you're saying.
Oh, I heard the first half, Mike.
Okay.
That I necessarily
Let me dump your video.
what
Mike, we're not hearing your sound is breaking up.
yeah about that
Maybe.
better now. No? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Dump your video. That might help.
What's that? All right.
Dump your video.
Right.
Stop.
Let's try that. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I was saying that I disagree with Matt. I agree with him on the importance of recognizing the sins of the past. I don't agree with him that it is an equivalency to what we're doing here. These folks are not in their homes. They're in public spaces where what they are doing isn't an appropriate thing to do in public place and is an illegal thing to do in a public place. So we are, in fact, relocating them to a place that is, and that can serve them better and can help them transition to wellness in life. And I don't have a problem with the language because it's exactly what we're doing and should be. And it's not equivalent to the sins of our past that you mentioned, because those were awful things. So I don't have a problem with the language. Thank you.
Okay, Claire and then Jennifer.
So I have an alternative suggestion that would not use neither the word move, transition, or relocate. But first I need to ask the city attorney, would the city of Eugene have any authority to require the people who are in the park or on the streets, require them to go to one of these spaces?
No. No, it's more of you are no longer allowed to remain here. This was intended to be temporary, but we have a place for you to go to.
Right. So we can require them to stop parking on the streets and we can require them to leave the parks, but we can't require them to relocate to these specific sites. So I'd like to offer to change, so a friendly amendment, it might be too much of a change to constitute a friendly, but to change the language to read in that section, when a safe parking site is authorized and established pursuant to this ordinance, those living in vehicles unlawfully parked on the city right-of-way in West Eugene shall be prioritized for occupying spaces at the safe parking site. When a safe tent site is authorized and established pursuant to this ordinance, those living in tents at 13th and Chambers and Washington Jefferson Park shall be prioritized for occupying spaces at the safe tent site. Because I believe that is the intent of these sections, is to say we're going to work with those people first to move them. We're not going to be like taking them by the shoulder and relocating them to those places. So if Councilor Keenan and Councilor Zelenka accept that as a change to their amendment.
Emphatically. Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you for that. That and your garbage collection, you're like wordsmith queen today.
You're on. Okay, that was it. That was excellent. So Jennifer, do you still have a comment?
I don't. I 100% agree with Councilor Surratt's suggestion.
And Mike, do you still have comments you need to make?
Yes, Mayor, I do. I'm going to turn off my video to do it. I know that there's some software updating being done remotely on my computer in the background, and I think that may be taking bandwidth away from my microphone here. So I appreciate too Claire's skill at the words here. I'm happy to support that. I do want to comment though that for me, this is the very issue that I think we should have more discussion around at a future point. For me, this is where our approach falls down and where I believe we are less successful as a community in dealing with this issue that we've heard so much from members of our community dealing with the negative effects. And it's our inability to say out loud, you being here is inappropriate. You being here is wrong and we need you to stop. And we're going to require you to stop being there. Our inability to say that, I think, is part of our inability to solve the problem. So I hope we'll talk more about that and what is appropriate behavior that we are willing to require at some future point. Thanks.
Okay, and I see Matt with a hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. And it's in response directly to Councillor Clark's comments, not this round, but the previous round about one's home. And I think we just look at things a little differently. And I know the unhoused population does in regards to the fact that one's home may not have 4 walls and a roof and running water. One's home may be on 4 tires that may or may not work. One's home may be on their back. One's home may be in a tent. But their home is Eugene, and that's there's a commonality there. So I just wanted to point that out, that there are different points of view that inform our truths.
Thank you for that. And so I believe we are ready to vote on this next editorial change, and everyone is clear on what the language is. Claire.
I just can't help but take a minute to say I'm really glad we didn't try to do this at 10:30.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, that would have been brutal. Okay, and not successful. So all in favor of this altered wording, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you. That passes 8-0. Thank you very much for sort of working your way through that, and Claire coming up with a solution. And then we have one more, Matt, looks like.
Mayor, council wisely married my 4 bullet points into three motions. So
That's right.
I think we covered the illicit camping piece in that first motion.
Perfect.
Thank you so much to staff and to council and to colleagues for, as you pointed out, Mayor, for doing this at 12:45 in the afternoon as opposed to 10:45 at night. It's greatly appreciated.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we have used half of your work session.
So the mayor, I'm sorry, you still need to vote on the ordinance as amended.
Right. Thank you. Okay, can we have that? Is that motion is not yet on the table?
It is.
It is.
So you'll be
seconded.
voting on adoption of the ordinance with all of the amendments that you previously passed.
Okay, everyone clear on that? All in favor, please raise your hand. Oh, nope, Randy has to speak to it. Hold on, Randy.
I apologize for taking this, only take a second. I just want to say I still have concerns with this being sunsetted in 2023. It just seems like this is good policy. And if it's not doing what we want it to do, or it's doing too much, we can always come back and rework it. I don't know if anybody else sees that the same way I do. I just hate to keep coming back and revisiting this unless we have to.
Alan.
Yeah, I used to think that what the sunset does, it's the four.
Oh, wait, you're muted.
I used to think that, Randy, and what I got used to was the sunsets actually force us to take a look at it. So it's like a forced reevaluation of it. So it has to come back to us if it has a sunset to move forward. So we usually get that couple months before the sunset takes effect so that we can reevaluate the efficacy of what we've done and make modifications as necessary. So,
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you very much. That passes. So now we really have completed that. Thank you very much for that, going through that process. And so, as I was saying, we've used half of our work session time. So we will proceed with the report on the roads, and we will come back to the 1059 discussion at a later date. We will have to reschedule that. And so I think actually that gives us all a little more time to process that and respond to some community comments. So that's probably a benefit. And with that, I will turn it back to the city manager to introduce this next topic.
Thank you, Mayor. This is one of my favorite topics every year. So I'm joined here by the awesome American Public Works Association accredited team. And I think maybe Katie or Matt going to kick it off. Katie? Awesome. Welcome, Katie and team.
Thank you. It'll take me just a minute to share my screen. Okay, so I think I'm ready. My name is Katie Marwitz, and I'm AIC Principal Engineer in Public Works Engineering. And first, I want to say thank you for taking time for this presentation today. Even from the discussion earlier, I know that there's a lot of really weighty and important issues going on in the community. So thanks for taking the break for this presentation. My intent of this presentation is that it will be a good news presentation, kind of a highlight of the work of our great public works teams. And several of you have seen or heard a really similar presentation to this in the last couple of years. And also to new counselors, I look forward to your input and your questions at the end. So this is an outline of what I want to talk about today. I'll give you some information about the pavement management report. We'll talk about the annual report for the road bond. I'll talk a little bit about 2020 and COVID, provide a construction highlight, and then I'll also touch on what we're looking at for this year in 2021. So first, I'd like to talk about the pavement management report. The report is produced by Public Works maintenance staff, and really it includes data about our whole transportation system. And some background about the transportation system, our Public Works staff manages 563 centerline miles of streets and 46 centerline miles of shared use paths. And in our pavement management system, our arterial and collector streets, so our biggest streets, are evaluated for their condition every year. And our residential streets and shared use paths are evaluated every 2 and 3 years. And during those evaluations, distresses, cracks, potholes, et cetera, are noted, and then work, a list of work is formed. And then when there's more work than available funding, that's where we get the term backlog. So moving on to talking about funding just a little bit, the pavement preservation program is funded really by 2 main sources, and those 2 sources are our local gas tax and then also our current street repair bond. And together those total about $12 million annually. But the current estimated need for annual funding is about $14.5 million if we want to set a goal of eliminating the reconstructs from our arterial and collector street system within 10 years. So next I want to talk about the actual backlog. So this is a graph of the backlog and how far we've come and the great progress that we've made. So the brief history of the backlog starts in 2003 with the establishment of the pavement preservation program. And in 2007, prior to the first bond measure, the backlog was estimated that it was going to reach $282 million by 2016. But in 2008, at the start of our very first bond measure, it was estimated at that time to be $171 million. And then, so fast forward, what are we, 10, 13 years and into our third bond measure now. And the backlog is now estimated at about $82 million, which is up a little bit from the 76.3 estimate from last year. And of that 82 million, it's important to point out that about $60 million of that backlog is in our residential street system. So we've really done a great job of making progress on our arterial and collector streets. So next, I want to talk about the 2017 street repair bond itself. So the measure was passed by voters in November of 2017, and it will provide about $51.2 million for street preservation and active transportation. And the council resolution associated with the street bond had a couple of requirements, and those included the formation of a citizen review panel, an annual report from that citizen group, and then also an annual report from an outside auditor. And in 2020, our SRP group comprised of 10 community members who had a range of experiences and interests, and the group met virtually 3 times with staff to talk about the progress of the road bond and to write the annual report. And really, I do want to mention that our staff generally appreciates the engagement and great questions that we get from that citizen review panel. It's really a great group. So one of the other required annual pieces with the bond is a report from an independent auditor. And those findings are included in the SRP report. It's an appendix. And on the screen, there's an excerpt that says in summary that all of the tested expenditures were supported by appropriate documentation, they were recorded properly, and that no exceptions were noted during that review. So before I move on to telling you about some of the highlights of 2020, I did want to look back at the year as a whole a little bit and remember where we were at this time last year. So I inserted this slide from the presentation I gave in May last year on this same topic. And at that time, we were just starting into the pandemic. We weren't sure where we were. We knew we were starting on this journey, and we were really looking for ways and strategizing about how we could keep our CIP work moving forward in a safe manner. And it's great to say that we were able to keep moving forward, and we had a very, very busy construction year. So in December of last year, Ann Fifield from planning gave a great presentation about economic recovery strategies. And as a reminder from that presentation, this slide is from that presentation. And I'd like to highlight that among all of the losses, the huge losses across a whole bunch of sectors, construction at the very bottom is one that you'll continue to see growth through 2020. And we saw that in our public works maintenance teams that handle right-of-way and utility permits, and also in our capital project team, which saw its largest construction year to date. So now talking about the bond work for 2020, the fund supported work on 9 streets in 2020 for a total of just under $2.5 million. Also added to that is that the South Willamette Street improvements did start in 2020. That includes $4 million of bond funds from the 2012 bond. The funds for this last year also included active transportation funds, and those were spent on the West Bank path rehabilitation and include enhanced pedestrian crossings and shared lane markings. So I've inserted this slide to really talk a little bit more about kind of the body of work of our capital project team and what we experienced during 2020. So during last year, we had projects and work from all 3 of these categories. We had work that started in 19 and ended in 20. We had 2020 work, and then we also have started work and design on a number of really large multi-year construction projects. So next, I'd like to talk about a highlight from last year, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about Garden Avenue and Walnut Street. Those were their bond-funded projects. And like many of our projects, it was initially scoped as pavement rehabilitation, but we recognize the opportunity to incorporate some more features to it that are important to our community outside of just pavement, outside of the street just being smooth. There's some other things that we recognize that were important to include. and that includes application of the CRO and the TSP. So the project included stormwater facilities, street trees. It incorporated recycled materials and asphalt as well as concrete through the use of SCMs, which is supplementary cementitious materials. And since the update of the CRO in 2016, we've really been looking for ways to kind of take the next step. The next step, what does it really look like to take the next step for our climate action and sustainability work within our capital improvement team? I do want to highlight that several of the bullets that have the asterisks in the list, those are things that we've been doing on our team for a number of years, and we will continue to do them. And those are the use of warm mix asphalt and the use of recycled asphalt content in our mixes. So SCMs is on this list, and I do want to take a small sidestep to talk a little bit about concrete. So SCMs, like I said, supplementary cementitious materials. They are substitute materials that you can substitute for cement. During the production of concrete, they're substitute materials, and they can include fly ash and other byproducts. And we've recognized that concrete is one of the most greenhouse gas intensive materials that we use. And so now we have taken the step now from allowing contractors to use the SCMs to now requiring them to use SCMs in their mixes as we move forward. So in 2020, we regularly saw mixes that included somewhere between 15 and 25% of this swap in materials in our concrete mixes. But going back to talking about the project specifically, another aspect of the project was active transportation improvements. So the TSP identified this project area as a neighborhood greenway, and in implementing that, we included shared lane markings. It has raised intersections and enhanced pedestrian crossings through the inclusion of bulb outs. So before I conclude, I wanted to share this list of the 2021 project list to convey that the work we do is not just pavement. We do a lot of really great work. So the list might be a little bit too small on the screen, but I think that's appropriate because it conveys the scale and number of projects that we have going and we have planned for this next year. So this list includes work we do in all of the service areas that we manage. We have parks projects, transportation projects, stormwater projects, and wastewater projects. And that the total from represented on the screen is almost $40 million, which will again be our largest construction year yet again. And so with that, I will conclude and gladly open it up to questions.
Thank you so much. That is, as you said, this is a feel-good presentation, and that information about the substitute materials for concrete is really, really compelling and exciting to be moving in that direction. I see that Alan has comments to make, so I'll turn it over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. When we first did the very first bond measure, TV station came and interviewed me and asked me what our campaign was. And I said, it was drive around. And that was a pretty good campaign because the roads were not in very good shape. And if you drove around today, you would see that it's a heck of a lot better. And actually our road system is in pretty good shape because we've been doing this work and we need to continue to be doing this work. And I think one of the hallmarks besides that is the backlog. I mean, when we were faced with over a $282 million backlog, getting it down to 82 million was exactly what we were trying to do. You won't hear about that much because this is one of those government programs that actually worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. And we accomplished exactly what we were trying to accomplish, which was to get rid of that backlog and improve our streets. And I think one of the other hallmarks of this is the promises made, promises kept aspects of it. That we did the audit, we did the citizen review panel, and we had specific lists of projects and we did those specific projects. So that formula works extremely well. And third time we've re-upped this, it is a testament to that. I also wanted to say that this is predominantly about fixing roads, not building new roads. I really much appreciated the examples of how we're helping facilitate the CRO and alternative modes, increasing alternative modes. One of the questions I had about that is when we put this together, I think the original motion back in the day was 5% for bike and ped, and then we increased it to 10. But that's really an underestimation of how much we spend on that, because when you put a road in and you put in sidewalks and you put in bike lanes and do other things like that, do we have a good estimate of what that number really is? Because it's hidden by just saying 5 to 10% goes to pads and bike ped facilities.
While I don't have a concrete number, I think that you are right and you're accurate. We've committed to spending $1 million a year on average for active transportation, but there are a lot of other pieces of the projects. For example, when we rehab a street, we upgrade all of the sidewalk ramps. So that's become a standard piece of our improvements, is that we will evaluate every ramp that's on a street, and if it's not compliant and up to standards, we will improve every one of them using the project dollars. I don't have a dollar figure or a percentage figure exactly for you.
Yeah, this keeps coming up. I think it might be something we want to think about how to track a little bit better, because getting that number of figuring out how much we actually do spend on that, because that's often a criticism of this, and we can't really answer that question very well. We can say it is more, be clear that that's factual, but we don't know how much more. The last question I had is about Vision Zero, and didn't touch on it too much, but maybe you can speak a little bit more to Vision Zero and how the work that we're doing is helping implement that policy that the council put in place a couple of years back.
Sure. I do think we are working with Vision Zero and making that a priority on all of our projects, trying to focus on safety. We also have a number of independent and freestanding projects where we've received grant funds that are specifically for intersections and areas of town that were identified as Vision Zero intersections. And through those, we work with our transportation planning staff to say what improvements, what's the need here, and what can we do about it? And then we're also taking a step to looking at the equity lens of those two. So a number of those upcoming, we have an intersection improvement coming up at River Road, Irving, Hunsaker, that will start later this summer, that is identified as a Vision Zero intersection. So we are taking those on just as we would any of our other projects.
Yeah, and they show up in other places too. I know in my neighborhood, for instance, I think it's 19th and Fairmount, changing the way that intersection moves is one of those types of projects too. Thanks.
Thank you. Randy and then Mike. We can't hear you. No. Sure. Okay, Randy, I'm going to turn to Mike, and then you can play with your sound, and I'll come back to you. Okay, Mike.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Sorry, I couldn't help that. That was a little joke for an old commercial. I appreciate, Katie, your report as always with this, and echo some of the things that Alan said. We started this thing. I think this was one of the very first things we did when we started council. Alan and I started at the same time, these 14 years and 3 months ago, or whatever, something like that. Each and every one of those years, I've asked the same question at this report, and I'm going to ask it again. And that is, can you tell me what the backlog of unimproved streets is? What the dollar amount for that backlog is?
I do not know that answer, but I know that I have Eric Johnson on the line, and he might have more information, or he can speak to that better.
Hi, Eric.
How you doing? Yeah, I can. It's in our report that we put out this year. I think if you wanted to go to, I think page.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up as
21. So we're at about $2.5 million backlog right now on our unimproved streets. So we brought it down quite a bit.
I was just going to say that I remember when that number was 60. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a tremendous effort. A part of that has been how the council, I think, takes extra scrutiny before and kind of looking at not bringing in unimproved streets and annexing them without a plan to bring them up to a city standard. And that's something I've always been a stickler for. But also the program that rest his soul, that Kurt came up with when we were having conversations about improving some of those roads in my ward at the time, to do maintenance overlays has certainly been a help. You guys see an expansion or a contraction or any changes in the level of maintenance overlays that we'll see as a part of work moving forward and as a part of this?
Yeah, I would say that, over the last couple of years, we've actually increased our funding for that program. We started off at about $200,000 a year. We've expanded that to $375,000. With our goal still in the next several years to reduce that backlog where every unimproved street is seeing an overlay. We actually did 2 projects on Friday out in Southwest Eugene, and possibly another one coming up before the end of the fiscal year in East Eugene. So
that's fantastic. And I just want to say thank you for that, because in Ward 5 in North Eugene, there's a ton of unimproved streets, both in the River Road Santa Clara area and in North Gillum area. And I know there are a ton of them in other parts of the community. In West Eugene, Ward 6, there's a lot of them as well. And I just have to say that the folks living in those areas, that the unimproved roads being given the maintenance overlay is a significant change in how that facility works for them. And so I will always be in support of increasing the capacity for us to do more maintenance overlays because of the efficiency of the use of dollars for that. So I just want to thank you guys for bringing that backlog down as well.
Right.
Thank you. Let's see, Wendy, let's see if you've got your sound back.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Hey, I just really wanted to thank staff for working on this. I've had the pleasure of watching this back to my time as an exec. And this is really a shining example of good governance. Something that would be interesting to me. I know we noticed a difference in some of the damage to fire apparatus suspensions and whatnot as the roads started to improve. Now, I know we can't come up with a dollar cost of savings for our entire community, but it would be interesting to see if Public Works Maintenance has noticed a difference in city vehicles from the improvement of these streets. The other thing I wanted to emphasize, and Councilor Zelenka touched on it, is the safety aspect. These improvements, these maintenance efforts have truly made our streets safer, especially for multimodal transportation, but even vehicular traffic. So this will be something that I continue to support, and I'm very glad to have seen the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and then Emily.
Thanks, Mayor. I just with appreciation and respect, I want to share concerns I've had from South Eugene neighbors and business owners on Willamette, whose businesses have been impacted, and observations about sharing the roadway, modular vehicular bicycle ped on Willamette, which is, I believe, one of the narrowest streets in the nation for the amount of usage it gets in peak hours. And so I'm just expressing observations made, and want to know if you could address perhaps some of those concerns that have been brought up by businesses in the area, in particular between 18th and 29th and Willamette, an area in which I've spilled my coffee more times than I can count because of the work. And the work is great. I appreciate the progress, but I long, as neighbors do, for that bike highway or bike pathways to be a little separated a little bit more than what has been presented. So I hope I'm not coming across too critical. I'm just expressing observations made by community members. In addition, the street repair review panel references that there was one meeting in particular, and the 3 times they met between January and March. I'm assuming that's January 2020 and March 2021. They didn't meet 3 times unless they're meeting monthly or so. That one meeting included a virtual tour of the projects. If there's a link that you could provide to that virtual tour, I'd be very interested in seeing that, please.
Well, I can speak to a couple of those things specifically. Actually, we did meet between January and March of 2021. Usually what we do is we meet at the end of the year so that we can kind of catch as much of the completed projects as we can. But it's every year just about around the end of the year and through the first part into March is when we actually meet. So unfortunately, the virtual tour, although we probably have the meeting recorded, and I can look at that. It was not a formal virtual tour. It was a meeting where I walked the group through pictures and videos of the projects to date in our discussion. So I'm glad to look and see if we have that video recording, which I can provide to you. So in terms of speaking to a layman, yes, we know on any project, construction is inherently disruptive, right? It's disruptive to our patterns. It's disruptive to our access. And we're continually working with the contractor to how can we be efficient with the project and make it, progress faster, but also trying to balance the needs of the public and especially the businesses. And when in 2020, when businesses were so impacted by having to stay home, that we wanted to make sure we're trying to minimize the disruption to the businesses in terms of access. So in doing that, it's required a lot of staging and sequencing and try this kind of ongoing delicate dance of how can we do the work to make sure that businesses stay open, but also make sure that we're making progress on the streets. So we recognize it's disruptive. And we have, whole parts of our staff that are working pretty diligently and meeting with the contractor on a weekly basis to say, okay, what did we get done? What should we expect? And how can we do it better?
I'm wondering if there's anything, Mayor, that we could explore to help offset that disruption. If there's anything that's revenue neutral, maybe with one of our providers, riding the bus, there's a lot of empty advertising space. And so maybe it's a conversation with LTD to provide some cost-free advertising for businesses that are impacted by the work. That could be win-win all around. And so don't know if those conversations are happening, but I'd be thrilled if ever they are, and to see those potentially come to fruition.
Yeah, Matt, happy to talk to you about that outside of this meeting, and we'll see what the options might be. Okay. Emily.
At least it mutes out the bad words, I was saying. Thank you for a feel-good topic. I needed it. I just want to briefly mention that list of the many other projects that you put up at the end had Lincoln School Park on it, and that plans for that started back when I started, and it's been on my list to say, what happened to Lincoln School Park? So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like, Alan, you want another round?
Yes, please, Mayor. Thank you. Sort of related to this is traffic calming, since I have you here. Traffic calming is always a big issue within neighborhoods. Can you talk about that program a little bit? How much dollars we have per year allocated towards that, and how that process works? I know it probably still is a long waiting list at traffic calming in your neighborhood because we're not funding it enough. So I wanted to highlight that as a potential thing for the council to look at in terms of increasing that funding for that program. And the part B of that same question about traffic calming is the original traffic calming we put in years and years ago is starting to deteriorate. We're starting to see some of the bumps fall apart. And I'm wondering, a good example is on Villard Street, which is one of the first traffic calming bumps that we put in. Now they're the asphalt's deteriorating, falling apart, creating hazards. So I'm wondering what we're doing about going back to the original ones and making sure that they're in good shape. So two-part question.
Sure. So I can speak to the second part and say that relates exactly the same as our road projects, right? We're starting to see some of the projects that we originally did rehab in 2008 or 2009 are starting to come back into needing repair again. And so that's one of the reasons, we've seen a little bit of uptake in the backlog as we start to need to work on those roads again, because really, as we know, the funding and work on our transportation system is a continuous cycle. It's not a do it once and it's done forever. So you were correct about transportation, about the funding. It is very limited. And I was trying to send Rob a quick message on how much that is annually, but I know that the outline of the process is they receive requests and they have now developed prioritization of those requests. So they gather data, they look at equity, and they have a list of said, okay, here's what we realistically can do in the next 3 to 4 years. And so we take that list and we implement it, sometimes as standalone projects, but oftentimes we try to put those in when we're already doing projects in the area, because there's a lot of efficiencies if we're already there doing a street rehab project that's close or adjacent. For example, this year we'll be doing a large project on Lincoln Street, but adjacent to it, there'll be some traffic calming that is installed on Jefferson Street. And that's just because there's efficiency that will already be out there. We know that it meets all the criteria. It's been identified and prioritized, so that'll happen at the same time. So there is a long waiting list, but we're doing the best we can to be good stewards of the money.
Katie, I can speak to the amount. I believe we have
Sure.
I think it's $100,000 a year, which is an improvement. I think it was 2018 fiscal year budget that it went from 25,000 a year to 100, but it's still, there's a much greater need than funding for the work. And one thing I'll just add, you did a great job, Katie, but in addition to citizen requests for traffic calming through Vision Zero, we've also tried to systematically look at how we can incorporate that into projects, including on some streets that are a little higher classification than just the local streets we've seen traffic calming in before, and typically around areas where people are crossing the street. And we've worked real closely with Eugene Springfield Fire on that too, to make sure that when we put that type of traffic calming in, it works for them.
And does the rehabilitation of the old ones come out of that 100,000? Repair of the old?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to bring that point up because we did quadruple it, but it's still so woefully underfunded. Again, council should really consider in the short term, probably doubling that again, and that's probably only about a quarter of what we really should be spending. And speaking of another woefully underfunded plan that we have, that's the bike ped plan. The last I heard when we figured out what the cost was and how many projects there were, and we were out at this is a while ago, so maybe there's an update to it, but we were at it would take us 100 years to fund all the projects on the bike ped plan without even the problem of going back and fixing the ones that we did. So do we have an update on that? And that's yet another thing that the council should be thinking about in terms of adding more funding because both of these things are traffic calming and the bike ped plan keep coming up over and over again as people's requests of things they want and see and that work and that we want and we should be, I think, more responsive to that. But is there an update on the bike ped plan timeframe?
Councilor Zelenka, I don't have that information at hand for the bike and pedestrian projects in our transportation system plan, but that's something we can bring information back on.
That'd be great. Thank you. Maybe it's 99 years now.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to take off from what Alan just said there on the bike ped plan. Is that, Matt, maybe you can speak to that. 99 years, that's how long it'll take us to get through everything that's on that plan?
I'm not immediately familiar that's the timeline, Councilor. I wouldn't want to speak to exactly what it is, but I'd like to bring you back some accurate information.
But it's a long way out. It's not a 10-year plan.
So the transportation system plan was basically a 20-year plan, and it had those projects included. I'd have to go back and look and see what gap we might have projected for need. So there's transportation SDCs that we created a project plan out of that's based on the TSB that takes care of a portion of those projects that are associated with new development. We have grants that we go out for, and we're actually very successful with grants. And we have funding through the pavement bond. So I'd have to check with our transportation planning team to see what that projects out to.
You've nailed exactly the reason I'm asking the question, which is that we do this in other places, and it's a concern to me. The methodology for how much we charge, and by the way, we just increased transportation SDCs by 50%, making housing more expensive. And what we charged is based on our plan list. If we have a plan list that we know we're not going to get to actually doing for a very long time, but those projects are how we're charging SDCs, there's a disconnect here that really needs to be discussed. If we're charging people SDCs for things and for their impact, and expecting that those monies will be used to complete mitigation of those impacts, then it ought to be within a time frame that's actually accomplishable, especially if we're charging so much more in order for those things to be done. That disconnect is something I really would like us to address at some point. Sarah, thanks.
Okay, any other comments on that or other issues? I want to say sort of two things. First is, as we do every year, thank this volunteer review panel who does this work. It's a significant contribution to the community. It's an important work that they do. It helps us understand what has gone on, and salute those folks who, and some of them have done this for quite a few years. So very important committee and important contribution. The second thing, is sort of interesting that I'm not opening up this can of worms. Just thinking about this, that we had a presentation as a city and not as a council a couple of years ago about the sort of cost of development and the impact of development choices around where the roads go in, and that, once you build roads, you have to maintain them forever, and that those costs continue and they can continue to go up, and that has been sort of the driving force behind some of our climate action plans and our compact development, is to sort of reduce the amount of new roads, that we're not continuing to add to that burden that every year it's never going to go away. We're always going to need to spend money to maintain roads. And so just looking to that backlog and looking that we're back in the cycle and thinking about how we do that. And then also thinking about an infrastructure package that is, very possibly coming our way at the federal level, and recognizing that there may be some opportunities to get ahead of some other pieces in our community, and particularly thinking about, how broadband gets, extended, and other things, that transit investments, other things that might be coming our way. Is just, that carrot is just out there. If that infrastructure package goes through, we'll have an opportunity to look at some of those broader lists. So not part of this conversation, but it's just a reminder. We're in a sort of a point of time where there's some opportunities. So thank you all for this report and discussion, and really great work. I do love reading this report every year. It's really interesting to me, and I love the maps. So thanks so much. And with that, we are adjourned 5 minutes early. So have a good afternoon, everybody.